You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Schnare with NACS.
And this is Stephanie Sikorski with NACS.
We're going to talk about how we are open convenience stores 24 hours a day, and we're in every community in America, and we can be the eyes and ears of the community and their customers. We have the opportunity to talk with Juliana Williams from In Our Backyard, who's going to help us figure out how we can also help combat human trafficking. So, Juliana, tell us a little bit about In Our Backyard and why we're talking today.
Absolutely. So In Our Backyard is a nonprofit. We do national work to stop human trafficking. We've been doing that for more than a decade. And we got involved with convenience stores back actually when we were doing work around the Phoenix Super Bowl and started doing some grassroots outreach, letting them know about human trafficking indicators and how to look for missing children. And the convenience stores were amazing. They were so supportive. They immediately understood and cared about their communities and wanted to be involved. And so in January 2017, we actually launched a program called Convenience Stores Against Trafficking, and been at that for a while now and had a lot of amazing support. So we're really glad to be here to talk about that and talk about how convenience stores can be involved.
So CSAT is the abbreviation for Convenience Stores Against Trafficking. And one of the things I love about this campaign is one of the taglines on your stickers, which you can talk a little bit more about, but more than convenience, we care. That is just, it's the epitome of what you're doing.
Exactly. We're not just convenient, we care. And we saw that right away with the industry, which is why we made that our tagline. That wasn't, going into it necessarily something we thought about. But once we started connecting with convenience retailers and seeing just how much they got this issue and said, we have so many customers in our store every day. I'm sure people are coming through that are being trafficked, and we can learn to spot the signs and we can recognize it and make a phone call. And so that just really fit for us, and it's rung true across the industry as we've continued.
So this isn't our first podcast or the first. We've worked with several different groups. We at NACS have been working with the Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign, which is a federal agency, I guess, that also works to combat trafficking throughout the U.S. And now we also are partnering with In Our Backyard to bring even more materials to our retailer partners and everybody who really wants to help make a difference in this cause and help customers, help people, help travelers, whomever happens to stop into our stores, just really get the safe haven they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our mission statement is linking arms across America in the fight against human trafficking. So we definitely don't think we can do this alone. It's all about partnership. And really what we see out of this is we see public awareness. You talk about convenience stores serving half the U.S. population every day. There's a huge opportunity to educate people that this issue is happening. We see convenience store clerks and managers being educated and being able to be an advocate in their store and in the community at large. And then we see victims who are in the restroom stalls and they're seeing our freedom stickers, and they're actually calling that hotline and being recovered and getting services. So all around, this is really an amazing opportunity to play a vital role in stopping this atrocity.
And Juliana, you talked about public awareness, which I think is so important. And while we've got people tuned in and listening to this right now, why don't you provide a little bit of stats around, what this issue is, why we should be involved, and that it might not just be something that you've read about once or twice.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, human trafficking is the largest and fastest growing crime in the world, second largest, fastest growing, there. And what we see is that, it affects people of any different socioeconomic status, ethnic background, male and female, and it is happening in the United States. It's not just large cities. We tend to think that that's the case, but we see it a lot in rural areas. We see it in smaller towns. And it's just something that once we really start looking for it, it becomes apparent that this has been happening all along. So it's a prevalent issue, but it's one that we can really do something about. A couple of other pieces of information. We see that, the average age that someone is forced into sex trafficking in particular is in the teen years, somewhere between 12, 15, 16. So it's really young. And, Polaris is a great organization that we work with. They actually have a website where they track data from human trafficking. So you can go on the Polaris website and find statistics by state that show how many calls were made to the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
And for those that are listening now and now hearing some of the statistics and wanting to get involved, but it might seem daunting, whether they're a single store operator or they have 500 or more stores, how does someone get involved with your organization, and what are the options in terms of size to scale something like this?
Absolutely. We work with single stores. We work with larger chains. We have really spent some time trying to create materials that are a good fit for the industry and streamline our program in a way that it's really easy to adopt. So what we have is we have a training video. It's 6.5 minutes. That can be available on a training platform. It can be available on our website. I actually have to share that we are partnering with Ready Training Online to provide that to the industry at no cost, which is really exciting. So it gets it out there more easily. We also have a reference sheet that goes in the store. That's just a quick reference so that the employee can remember the signs and know what to do if they see human trafficking and know how to safely respond in a way that doesn't put them at risk. And then we have those freedom stickers I mentioned. They go in the restroom stalls. And the real reason for that is it's the only place that a victim of human trafficking is alone and they're safe enough to call or text. And I'll just have to throw this in there because we get asked all the time, well, they don't have cell phones. They actually do. And that's because the trafficker uses that just as one more way of controlling them. So they are able to use that phone, and they just don't know that a helpline is available. I mean, that's the thing, that we just still are in a place where we need so much more awareness. A recent Thorn report, which is a great nonprofit in this movement, found that 67% of victims never saw a helpline while they were being trafficked, and yet 74% of them would have liked to have seen one. So that's just something we can do is get that information out there. So we prepackage the materials and we send them to the corporate office, or if it's, one store, we send them to the store and they distribute. They're ready to go and be put up. It's super easy. We don't charge for any of that. We just provide it free of charge and try to make it as simple as possible.
So Juliana, you mentioned that you do training materials for or training videos for store employees, but some of our listeners might just be on the road right now. I mean, a lot of us listen to podcasts while out driving, while getting from point A to point B. So just real quick, if you don't mind, what are some of the indicators of someone being trafficked, or of signs to recognize of something? And then also, what kind of trafficking are we talking about here?
Yeah, let me start there. So there is both labor and sex trafficking in the U.S. About 80% of what we see reported is sex trafficking, but I believe that's in part because we just aren't as aware of labor trafficking, but we're getting there. And so with labor trafficking, there's forced fraud or coercion, and it's to obtain some kind of labor. That can be in any industry. We see it commonly in domestic work. We see it in agriculture. It can be traveling sales crews. It can be restaurants. There's lots of different industries. And then with sex trafficking, you're going to see that more in illicit massage, escort, online, hotels and motels, strip clubs, things like that. And the distinction to remember is that the majority of people in those situations are being trafficked. We tend to think that people are somehow choosing prostitution, but the reality is the majority are being trafficked. And if anyone is a minor, even if they don't have a trafficker, they are considered a victim of trafficking because a minor cannot choose to engage in prostitution. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And then, the indicators, we try to keep them fairly simple for our training, because we know the convenience store environment, there's not a lot of time to be recognizing these things. But one is kind of interesting. They tend to avoid eye contact, and especially, with sex trafficking, but really with both, because there's a lot of control, there's a lot of threats, there's a lot of fear and traumatic bonding. And so, they're just going to try to kind of get in and out and not connect with anyone because they're afraid of what their trafficker may do. There's going to be an element of control. And sometimes this can look like more of a domestic violence relationship. And in reality, there's another layer to it. But they may not, make purchases on their own, or they may not speak for themselves. The trafficker may speak for them. Typical things that come from the trauma they've endured in terms of being fearful or depressed or anxious. The other thing to remember is a lot of times, sometimes they will, but a lot of times they're not going to identify themselves as a victim. And so that's where what we say is trust your instincts. If something seems wrong, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's a non-governmental agency. Their focus is getting help to the victims. And even if what you observed was not human trafficking, that's okay. If you think it might be, make that phone call. The trained advocates can help people decipher and try to understand if what they observed was potentially a trafficking victim. And then they're going to get them the help they need. They're going to get connected with law enforcement that have been trained on human trafficking, and they're going to get them connected with victim service providers. And it really depends on the situation exactly what that response will look like. But again, the focus is really on getting them the help that they need.
And Juliana, you've had a lot of industry support from convenience retail so far. I'm sure you've got a number of different stories of impact. Is there one that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. We got to hear this story through one of our nonprofit partners, and it just, these things just keep you going, because this is hard. This is hard stuff and really tragedy in our society. But there was a young woman who was being trafficked. Actually, she was a mother, and been with her trafficker for a while. And, you just kind of get to a point where enough is enough, that even though there's so much traumatic bonding, she'd just been abused and just wanted out. And so he actually, he needed to get something at the convenience store. So they went to the convenience store, and she just kind of slipped in to use the restroom and saw the freedom sticker. And so she contacted the hotline, and they arranged a safety plan with her to get her and her child out. A lot of times it's not going to happen right there in the store environment, because, they're in and out in probably less than 2 minutes. And so it's going to be that safety plan. Where is she staying tonight? Hotel, motel. So they were able to recover her and her child, and she's now receiving services and recovering from what she endured. And that wouldn't have happened if that convenience store hadn't posted that sticker.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've also been working, I know some of them when we first met years ago, I think it was around as you mentioned earlier, during Super Bowl. So I know that it's not always at sporting events. It's not always in cities. It's not always in rural America or anywhere. But I know that's a big focus is major sporting events and concerts. Yeah. And I know that you've been working with some state associations to make these messages clearer. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are actually doing our 10th operation surrounding Super Bowl this year in Atlanta, and we have a partnership with the Georgia Association of Convenience Stores. And what we focus on there is we focus on trying to outreach and get to vulnerable people. And a lot of what that involves is vulnerable youth, especially who are missing. 1 in 3 missing children will be approached by a trafficker within 48 hours of leaving home. And so we're trying to get to them before a trafficker does. And so we actually put together a missing children's book surrounding the Super Bowl of kids that are missing in that area. And the convenience stores are a huge help in taking those booklets and trying to look out for those kids. When we were in Minnesota this last year, we partnered with the association there, and we got direct tips from convenience stores about some of these missing kids that actually we were able to provide that information to the law enforcement team that was working on, reduction of sex trafficking in the area, and they were able to make some recoveries out of those tips. And so convenience stores have been really instrumental in that. You hear sometimes that Super Bowl is the largest human trafficking event, and that's just not true. Human trafficking really does happen 365 days a year in every zip code. But when you have a large event, you're typically, especially with a sporting event, you're bringing in a large male population. You're having kind of a party atmosphere where anything goes. And so it just encourages and increases the demand for the purchase of commercial sex. And those individuals may not realize that those that, they're engaging with are actually victims of human trafficking. And so law enforcement does a lot of work around Super Bowl to make arrests of traffickers and buyers and try to recover victims, and we support them in that. And then we do a really large awareness event. It's an opportunity to engage a community in how do we tackle this issue 365 days a year. And so that's what we've seen as successful. And then, we've worked in other cities. We worked with the Indiana Petroleum and Convenience Store Association leading up to the Indy 500 there, providing them with training and our resources. And we're really starting to partner with more and more state associations and more convenience store chains in this effort.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that so many groups groups like ours, like NACS and different state associations, are working with their their members to really get this information out there, and that you guys are doing this.
Absolutely.
So let me step back. I want to ask a question. So your founder, Nita, why did she get involved with this?
So Nita is a survivor of domestic violence, actually, from her first marriage, and had a successful career in business and decided to go back and get her master's degree. And while she was studying for that, she first learned about human trafficking. This was back in 2006. And even after how much she had done in anti-domestic violence work, she said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen on planet Earth. And at that time, there really wasn't much going on in terms of anti-trafficking work. I mean, we didn't even make it its own law in terms of it being illegal in the U.S. until the year 2000. So there wasn't a lot going on. And so she started researching, and she started, traveling and meeting with, the few experts that were in the field at the time. And she decided to write a book. And so she wrote what has now been acclaimed as the primer on human trafficking in America. It's called In Our Backyard, Human Trafficking in America and What We Can Do to Stop It. And so she got involved, and she started doing work around the Super Bowl in 2010. We're based in Oregon, so in 2009, she was asked to lead a chapter of what's called Oregonians Against Trafficking Humans. And then, 2011 Freedom Stickers were initiated with the help of survivors, and so we've just grown from there. So we've been kind of doing work since 2009. That original group got incorporated into our nonprofit now.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's you can hear more about it now. I mean, you go on social media. There was stories within the last year. Facebook, I think, took it very far when one of the a flight attendant for one of the major airlines helped somebody. But I love hearing the stories of people getting help that they need. And I think the more you say, the more we keep talking about it, the more it's out there, the less of a strange thing it is, and people just know something's not right here. Let me report it. I know, like, DHS has the See Something, Say Something campaign, which is not about trafficking, but the same thing rings true in my ear. Like, this doesn't seem right. I need to report it somewhere.
Well, and you bring up a great point. We talked about that a lot of these things, unfortunately, do happen in our backyard, appropriately named, as Juliana has said. But because of the size of our industry and the fact that we are a fabric of so many different communities across the U.S., it doesn't have to be that way. So for us to be able to come together is great.
Yeah, I think convenience stores can be a huge part of this solution. I mean, when you think about the sheer volume, and then there's just a few other factors. Restrooms that are available to the public, that's a safe place. When you think about longer hours of operation, more chances of potentially seeing, victims in those later hours. And then, you combine that with, like you said, convenience stores that are part of the fabric of their community. There's a huge impact here. I mean, I really believe we can make major progress in taking this down with the help of convenience stores.
Well, Juliana, that was the perfect ending here. We thank you for your time today. One quick thing, where can folks find these resources we talked about earlier?
Absolutely. So if you go to inourbackyard.org/CSAT, that's CSAT. You'll get all the resources there. You'll get my contact information there. We'd love to have you be one of our partners.
And you can find it on convenience.org. And Juliana, thank you. And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.